It was one of those quiet evenings at home, the kind where the hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the clock are the only sounds in the house. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner and was about to call it a night when I heard the faint creak of footsteps behind me. Startled, I turned around quickly, expecting to see my husband or my daughter, but the kitchen was empty. Or so I thought. A moment later, I heard a familiar voice, my stepson's, breaking the silence. "Hey, can I help with something?" he asked, standing there with an almost shy smile. He wasn't the type to hang around the kitchen, let alone offer to help, so his presence caught me off guard. You see, our relationship hadn't been the easiest. Blending families is rarely smooth, and while we were always polite, there was this invisible wall between us. So, when he stepped closer, it wasn't just the surprise of him being there, it was the way he looked at me, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to begin. "I was just wrapping up," I said, trying to sound casual while hiding my surprise. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked over to the counter, his hands fidgeting like he was working up the courage for something. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you," he finally said, his voice low but steady. My heart skipped a beat. Was this about school? Friends? Was something wrong? I couldn't tell, but there was a seriousness in his tone that made me put the dish rag down and turn my full attention to him. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that feels like it stretches forever. Then he took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine, and said something that left me completely speechless. What he revealed that night in the kitchen, when no one else was around, changed the way I saw him and us forever. But what surprised me even more was the reason he chose to share it in that moment. I stood there, my hands frozen in place, staring at him as his words hung in the air. His voice had cracked slightly as he spoke, and I could tell whatever he was about to say had been weighing on him for a long time. But instead of blurting it all out at once, he hesitated, looking down at the kitchen counter like he was second-guessing everything. "Go on," I said softly, hoping to ease the tension. Inside, though, I felt like my heart was racing a mile a minute. It wasn't every day that my stepson opened up to me like this, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and worry. He finally looked up at me, his expression conflicted. "I know we don't talk much," he began, his voice quieter now. "And I know I'm not the easiest person to get along with. But there's something I need to say because I don't think I've ever said it before." I could feel my chest tightening. Was this an apology? A confession? My mind started racing through all the possibilities. He had always been a reserved kid, keeping most of his feelings tucked away behind a calm but distant demeanor. It wasn't that he was rude or dismissive, he just never let anyone in, not even his dad sometimes. So to hear him standing there, willing to open up, was both surprising and a little overwhelming. He paused again, fidgeting with the sleeve of his hoodie. "You probably think I don't notice," he said, glancing at me briefly before looking away. "But I see how much you try. With Dad, with me, with everyone. And I know I don't show it, but it means a lot." My breath caught in my throat. Of all the things I had imagined he might say, this wasn't one of them. I didn't know whether to smile, cry, or just stand there speechless. But then his voice shifted, and there was something deeper in his tone. "There's something I've been hiding," he added, barely above a whisper. His eyes met mine again, and this time, they didn't waver. "And I don't know how you'll react, but I need to tell you." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I braced myself, unsure of what was coming next. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, and for a moment, the silence between us felt deafening. My mind raced, trying to piece together what he could be hiding. Was he in trouble? Did something happen at school? 100 questions swirled, but I didn't dare interrupt him. He needed to say this in his own time, in his own way. "I've been keeping it to myself because I didn't know how to talk about it," he began, his voice faltering slightly. "And honestly, I didn't think anyone would care." That last part hit me like a ton of bricks. How could he think that? Had I failed to show him how much I cared? Or was this just a reflection of how hard it had been for us to connect since I came into his life? He ran a hand through his hair, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. It's hard to feel like I belong sometimes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean, Dad and I have always been close, but when he met you and everything changed. I guess I just felt like there wasn't a place for me anymore. His words stung, not because they were meant to hurt, but because they revealed a truth I hadn't fully considered. I had tried so hard to make our blended family work, but maybe in focusing on what I thought was best, I had missed what he really needed. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel that way, I said softly, my voice cracking slightly. That was never my intention. He nodded, but his expression remained conflicted. I know, he said. And it's not just you. It's me too. I've been shutting people out, and it's gotten to the point where I don't even know how to let them in anymore. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could figure it out together, but before I could speak, he added, there's more to it, though. Something I've been doing, something I'm not sure you'll understand. My stomach tightened as I watched him struggle to find the right words. Whatever he was about to reveal felt like it was going to change everything, and yet I still had no idea what it could be. I felt the weight of his words settle over the room like a thick fog. His eyes darted around, avoiding mine, as if searching for the courage to keep going. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him he could say anything, but I held back. He needed this moment, and I wasn't about to interrupt it. It started a few months ago, he finally said, his voice trembling. At first, it was just something small. Something I thought didn't really matter. But then, it kind of spiraled. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away again. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Every instinct in me wanted to ask, what spiraled? What happened? But I forced myself to stay silent, letting him unfold the story at his own pace. The air felt charged, like we were standing on the edge of a storm, waiting for it to break. I was looking for something, he continued. Something to make me feel better, I guess. I didn't even realize what I was doing at first. It was just little things, staying out later, ignoring texts, avoiding everyone. He paused, taking a shaky breath. But then I started hiding stuff, things I was doing, places I was going. My chest tightened as I listened, my imagination filling in the blanks. I had noticed small changes in him lately, the way he'd retreat to his room more often, the way he seemed to avoid eye contact at dinner. But I had chalked it up to typical teenage behavior, never realizing there might be something deeper going on. And then there was this one time, he trailed off, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as though he needed something solid to hold on to. I didn't think anyone noticed, but I think Dad might have. He asked me about it, but I just lied. I told him everything was fine. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. I've been lying a lot, he admitted, his voice barely audible. And I hate it. But I don't know how to stop. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the lies, it was about what they were hiding. Whatever he was about to tell me, I could feel it coming, like the final moments before lightning strikes. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for the impact. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, as the weight of his words pressed down on me. My stepson, who had always seemed so composed on the surface, was now standing in front of me, unraveling a part of himself I had never seen before. His hands were still gripping the counter, his knuckles white, as if he was bracing for my reaction. But before I could say anything, he took a deep breath and spoke again. There's more, he said, his voice almost breaking. It's not just the lying, it's what I've been lying about. He glanced at me, his eyes searching mine for something, maybe reassurance, maybe courage. I've been sneaking out. A lot. To meet someone. This admission hit me like a jolt, but before I could process it, he continued. It's not what you think, he said quickly, sensing the worry on my face. It's not some girl or anything like that. It's this guy I met online. I felt a chill run through me, the kind that comes when something you've been fearing suddenly feels very real. Online? I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm despite the alarm bells going off in my head. He nodded, his expression a mix of shame and defensiveness. He said he could help me with something, he explained. Something I've been struggling with. At first, I didn't believe him, but then. I don't know. He just seemed like he understood me, you know? My heart sank as I listened, every instinct screaming at me to ask more questions, to get to the bottom of this. But I forced myself to stay composed, to let him keep talking. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. He said he could teach me how to stand up for myself. How to not feel so small all the time. His voice was shaky now, the vulnerability in his words cutting through me like a knife. I know it sounds stupid, but I believed him. I thought maybe this was what I needed to finally, I don't know, fix myself. I felt a pang of guilt then, realizing just how deeply he'd been struggling without me, or anyone really noticing. But before I could respond, he dropped another bombshell. He wanted me to meet him in person, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I almost did. I was standing outside the place we agreed on, but something didn't feel right. So I left. My stomach twisted at the thought of what could have happened. Did you tell anyone about this? I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head. I was too scared. And now I feel trapped. If I stop talking to him, what if he gets angry? What if he finds me? The fear in his voice was palpable, and it sent a wave of dread through me. This wasn't just about lies anymore, it was about something far more dangerous, something that could spiral out of control if we didn't act fast. And as I looked at him, I realized we were standing at a crossroads, with no easy way forward. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as his words sank in. The thought of him being so close to danger made my stomach churn, but I knew this wasn't the moment to panic. He had come to me, and that meant he was finally ready to trust me. I needed to be strong for him. We'll figure this out together, I said firmly, my voice as steady as I could make it. But the first thing we need to do is cut off all contact with this person. No more messages, no more meetings, nothing. He hesitated, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if he tries to find me, he asked, his voice trembling. What if he does something worse? We won't let it get to that, I assured him. But we can't do this alone. We need to tell your dad, and we may even need to involve the police if this guy tries anything. My words seemed to hit him all at once, and he nodded, though I could see the fear lingering in his eyes. That night, we sat down with his dad and explained everything. At first, my husband's face went pale, his hands clenching the armrest of the chair. But instead of reacting with anger, he placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. We'll protect you, he said simply, his voice full of determination. With my husband's help, we reported the situation. The authorities took it seriously, especially when they discovered the man's online profile was tied to other cases. It turned out he had been targeting vulnerable teens, using similar promises to lure them in. Knowing we had taken the right steps brought some relief, but the tension still hung heavy in the air. Days later, as we started to feel a sense of normalcy returning, my stepson came to me again. This time, his face held something different, an expression I couldn't quite place. There's one more thing I didn't tell you, he said hesitantly. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? When I left that night, I wasn't alone, he admitted. Someone was following me. I didn't see his face, but I think it was him. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't over. The man might have disappeared for now, but the thought of him still lurking somewhere, watching, left an unease I couldn't shake. The danger hadn't ended, it was just waiting. The weight of his final revelation hung heavily between us, the fear in his voice cutting through me like a knife. Someone had followed him that night, possibly the same man who had been manipulating him online. The realization made my chest tighten, but I knew I couldn't let my fear show. He needed me to be calm, to reassure him that we were still in control, even if everything felt uncertain. "We're going to keep you safe," I said firmly, reaching for his hand. "No matter what, we won't let anything happen to you." My husband and I decided to inform the authorities immediately about this new detail. They assured us they would increase surveillance on our neighborhood and monitor any suspicious activity connected to the man's online accounts. Knowing we had people watching out for us brought some comfort, but the unease lingered, especially for my stepson. For weeks, we kept our routines normal but cautious. My husband started driving our stepson to school and picking him up every day. We made sure he was never alone, even at home, and installed new security cameras around the house. Every knock at the door, every car idling too long on our street, sent my heart racing, but I tried not to let it show. I didn't want him to feel even more burdened by the situation. Slowly, as time passed, things began to feel safer. The authorities informed us that the man's online accounts had been deactivated, and they believed he had gone into hiding after realizing he was being investigated. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough to let us breathe again. One evening, as we were sitting at the dinner table, my stepson did something that took me by surprise. "I just want to say, thank you," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "For believing me. For not getting mad. I don't know if I would have been able to handle this alone." His words brought tears to my eyes, but I managed a smile. "You don't have to handle anything alone," I said gently. "We're a team. Always." That moment felt like a turning point, not just in our relationship but for him as well. He started opening up more, sharing little things about his day or his feelings, things he'd always kept to himself before. The wall that had once stood between us seemed to be crumbling, brick by brick. Months later, life felt normal again. The fear had faded, replaced by a stronger sense of trust and connection between us. My stepson began seeing a counselor to help him process everything, and it was clear he was growing more confident and self-assured with each passing day. Looking back, I realized the experience, as terrifying as it was, had brought us closer in ways I never could have imagined. It reminded me how important it is to pay attention, to look beyond the surface, and to create a space where the people you love feel safe enough to share their struggles. As we sat together one evening, laughing over some silly inside joke, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that he had trusted me, grateful that we had faced the storm together, and grateful for the bond we had built out of it all. The danger had tested us, but in the end it had made us stronger. And that was something no one could take away. In the days that followed his confession, the tension in our home slowly began to ease. Knowing the authorities were involved gave us a sense of safety we hadn't felt in weeks. My husband and I remained vigilant, though, ensuring our stepson was never alone and keeping the lines of communication open. My stepson started to change in subtle but meaningful ways. He seemed lighter, less burdened by the secrets he had been carrying. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, he shared something that caught me off guard. "I think part of me knew it was wrong from the beginning," he admitted, his voice soft but steady. "I just didn't know how to stop." It felt like he was the only person who understood me. His honesty floored me, and I felt a wave of compassion. "You don't have to carry that by yourself anymore," I told him. "You're not alone. We're here for you, no matter what." Over the next few weeks, he began seeing a counselor. At first, he was hesitant, unsure if it would help, but gradually he started to open up. The sessions gave him a safe space to process everything, and I could see the difference it made. He was learning to trust himself again, to find his voice. Meanwhile, the authorities kept us updated. The man who had targeted him had gone silent, likely spooked by the investigation. While it didn't erase what had happened, knowing he was no longer a threat brought us all a sense of relief. One night, as we sat down for dinner, my stepson said something that stayed with me. "I thought I was broken," he admitted, looking down at his plate. But I'm starting to realize I'm not. I just needed someone to remind me. You're not broken, I said, my voice firm. You're strong. And you're brave for speaking up. In that moment, I realized how far we had come, not just as a family, but as individuals. The experience had tested all of us in ways we hadn't expected, but it had also brought us closer. It reminded me that the hardest moments often hold the greatest opportunities for growth. As I watched my stepson laugh at a joke his dad made, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had weathered the storm, and while the scars might remain, they were a testament to our resilience. Together, we had found our way back to a place of hope.